Stay on the stage. Okay, well, thanks for coming out today. Obviously, power is a big issue. The reality is, at this point in our lives, nobody really tends to go without power anymore. It might be as simple as making sure we have our cell phone, so that in emergencies we can contact assistance, etc. Or it might be that we have a cottage or a place that's outside of the city and we're looking to power things on a little bit more of a permanent basis. So I'm going to talk a little bit about power solutions in general, portable power in particular. Okay? So first off, I'm from a company that's called Growing Greener Innovations. So we actually specialize in environmentally friendly portable power solutions. So hence the background and the talk. Our big thing is that we're looking to make meaningful changes towards a more sustainable future. So that's us. Okay, so first off, let's talk about your options when you're looking at power. If you're looking to connect your cabin or your cottage, your lake lot, whatever it is, to the power grid, some of the overall that you're looking at, you're going to have to run power to the property line. Then you're going to, which is going to cost you a lot of money, by the way. If anybody's ever looked into that, you're looking at numbers usually range in $20,000, $25,000 to bring the power out to your property line. From the property line, you're going to pay to run it back into the property to your cabin or cottage, whatever you have there. And again, you're going to be looking at some additional dollars there. And you're also looking at high delivery costs. So a lot of people shy away from this option because it can be so expensive. The benefits, of course, are very obvious. Once you're on the grid, you're going to get much more reliable power typically than most of your other options. Not all. That's getting better every day. The second common area for power is, of course, going off-grid. So whether that's a solar system, a PV, photovoltaic system, it could be a wind turbine or a river turbine, any of those types of systems. And there's even other newer technologies that are out there. So I'm going to touch on each of these a little bit more. And then, of course, the third option is portable power, power that you can bring with you from the city to any location. So maybe it's not going to be the cottage, maybe you have a trailer, you like to go to different areas, or maybe it is a cottage, but you don't necessarily want to pay the higher cost of the first two options. There we go. So when I mentioned that the cost of delivery of electricity once you're on the grid at a cottage is higher, I actually did a little slide just to give you an example of what the cost can be like. So this was actually my power bill within the city of St. Albert. My mother-in-law, who's just outside the Sherwood Park in the county, and then the business that had the office next to me, who has a farm that's a little bit further outside again. So just look at the difference in the cost. So for me, I was paying 4 cents and 4.29 cents per kilowatt hour. My mother-in-law was up to 8.56, and she's 2 kilometers out of Strathcona, like 2 kilometers out of Sherwood Park, and it already doubled. Okay, so she's still on the grid, but the delivery charges went up by double. The next door neighbor to us, to our offices, is higher again at over 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and showed me a bill where he had it as high as 90 cents a kilowatt hour. So you're talking about 10, 20 times the cost for delivery if you're outside the city. So if you are looking at going on grid, keep that in mind when you're running power out there, that your costs won't be just limited to getting the power line out there and getting everything set up. You will be looking at some very high costs for delivery of electricity. Still a good option for a lot of people, especially if you're going to be living out there full-time or semi-full-time. So it's always worth looking into, but be aware that the costs are not limited to just getting the power out there. It's pretty high to operate. Okay, so off-grid systems. Off-grid systems typically always work in a similar scenario to this. Some type of a capture system. So in this case on the diagram I've shown a solar panel. But it could be a wind turbine or a river turbine, anything like that. Some type of a capture system, a charge controller, so a piece of electronics that's going to control the flow of electricity to the batteries, where you're going to store your energy, and then an inverter. And the inverter takes the direct current that's captured through the solar panel and turns it into alternating current that we use on just the regular plugs in our households. So most of our items use alternating current. So you're going to need those 4 pieces. There are all sorts of information out there on how to do this stuff yourself. If you're looking to do it, read into it. There are definitely parts you can do yourself. If you're particularly savvy, you can do the whole thing yourself. If words like charge controllers and inverters are really new to you, hire a professional, okay? Because it is still something that you can get yourself into some trouble with. This is electricity. There is always the danger of fires and things like that. So do be careful if you're looking into doing certain pieces yourself. But if you want a fun project, I really do encourage you, go on Pinterest, go on Instructables, any of those awesome sites, and look up how to make your own little river turbine or wind turbine and things like that. They can be great little projects, and they do work. We've done them before, and I've seen them working from other people as well. So it's really an interesting area. If anybody is interested in that stuff, look it up. In this type of scenario, solar panels are no longer actually as expensive as they used to be. Usually it's the storage of your energy that's most expensive. That's the batteries. So the price of solar panels have actually dropped, I don't know the actual percentage, but quite significantly in the last few years. So you're now able to get solar panels under $1 per kilowatt, per watt, pardon me. So you can get quite a bit of panels at a reasonable price. It's also one of the nice things with this type of system is you can add on to it. So I know a lot of people look at a solar system and think, are you smiling at my shirt? Did I get a smile from my shirt? Just it says abs are cool, but have you tried donuts? Because right? So I saw the giggle, I knew it had to be the shirt. So anyway, so with the solar systems, for example, you can build onto them. A lot of people hesitate to get into solar or off-grid systems because they think it's all or nothing. It doesn't have to be, actually. One of the things, like for example, in the city where you're attached to the grid, one of the simplest things to do is simply try and go net zero, which means you're reducing your consumption of electricity from the grid and putting more green energy on. So now there are regulations with that. You can't produce more than you consume. But in general, it's a good way to go because you can always get there, start with a couple of panels and a couple of batteries. As long as you have the right setup, you can add on panels and add on batteries as you go and work your way off grid. So that's a nice option for people who aren't in a financial position to lay down, say $30,000 to set up an off-grid system. So something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's talk about portable power. So I'm picking on gas generators here, but I'm talking generally about small engines in general here. We all have seen them. They're very, very common, and for a reason. The reality is, when we're off-grid, we still need power, whether it's construction, oil and gas, camping, recreation, whatever it is, we're going to take power with us almost always. So these are very, very common. Problem is, we all know they're very loud, right? We also know that they're very expensive to operate. Even with gasoline being at the lower cost, the most fuel-efficient generator on the market, which actually is the Honda right behind us, by the way, it still operates, assuming 88 cents a liter for gas, you're still looking at 60 cents a kilowatt hour to run it. So now you're talking about a pretty expensive piece of equipment to operate and generate your electricity. So something, again, to keep in mind, quite expensive to operate. They're heavy, so they're not as portable, but not too bad. But mostly, one of the big things, at least from my perspective, is the fact that they're very, very bad polluters. A lot of people don't realize just how bad small engines are. We always think about cars as being the bad polluters, right? We think, the exhaust, they're terrible, and they were. But they've actually become so much more fuel efficient and less emissions in general than what they used to be even 20 years ago. So I'm going to give you an example of the difference between small engines and cars. So generators, and this is Canada and the US, are legally allowed to produce 610 grams of carbon monoxide per kilowatt hour. So that's every 1,000 watts of energy. So if you ran your microwave for an hour or Skillsoft for an hour, don't run your microwave for an hour, you burnt it, it's dead. If you run something for 1,000 watts, you're producing 610 grams of carbon monoxide. By contrast, I use the Honda Civic only because it's a very, very common car. The Honda Civic runs at 2.1 grams of carbon monoxide per mile. So if you actually put that side by side, how many miles would you drive the Honda Civic to get to the amount of carbon monoxide that that generator put out 1 hour? Oh, video doesn't want to run. 3,200 kilometers. I'm not even joking. I actually, when we first posted that on our website, someone was like, wow, I love what you're doing, but that can't be right. And so I posted the links. And it is in fact verifiably true. Small engines, the biggest thing actually with them is that they typically don't have a catalytic converter. And if you know anything about engines, with thin cars, that reduces your emissions quite significantly. There's no catalytic converter on a small engine. So they're very bad polluters, and they're everywhere, whether it's lawnmowers or generators or snowblowers, you name it. So these things are actually putting out quite a bit of emission. If you look at a generator that's being used in, say, a light construction setting, like a roofer or framer is using it 40 hours a week, you'd be looking at driving the Honda Civic around the world 217 times. One generator, just one. So they're pretty shockingly bad. So here's just a couple more stats from WHO, which is the World Health Organization. The annual global emissions of carbon monoxide has been estimated at 2,600 million tons per year. That's poisonous gas. So this is really a major problem. And the number one cause of it being exhaust of internal combustion engines. So we know it's a problem. Now, and that's just carbon monoxide. On the greenhouse gases, so now we're talking carbon dioxide, you're looking at an average, this is actually from an Environment Canada report, you're looking at an average of 2.61 tons of emissions per generator per year. We're easily over 1 million generators in use on a yearly basis in Canada, so that's a whole lot of greenhouse gas just from generators. And globally, it's far, far worse actually. So when you get to countries like, or continents like Africa and Asia, where the power grid is very unstable and not very centralized, you end up with a situation where these are very heavily used, and they're even more polluting. But the problem is, if anybody tells you, well, just use a battery system, if you're a roofer or framer, somebody's going to tell you, well, batteries take a long time to recharge, so it's not a suitable replacement for a gas generator. And I get it. The truth is, if you're that roofer or framer and your battery goes dead at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, what are you going to go home? It's just not a realistic scenario for us. We expect our power to be continuous. So battery solutions have never really been much of the scene until now. So in the last few years, we're starting to see much more of what we call a solar generator, which is what we produce at our company. Ours is called the Grengen, so think green engine, really complicated, I know. We use a lithium ion battery pack that is stackable. So it's power stack technology. We have a patent pending on it. And the way our system works is it's completely emission free because it's a battery. It's a super battery, so it's ultra light. Each battery pack is 100 amp hours but only weighs 12 pounds. And you can just stack them. So if you need to run longer, stack an extra battery or swap them. These systems can also be charged as they're discharged. So if you're looking at a scenario where you're out at the lake or the cabin, you can actually be charging with the solar panel as you're using it. So in theory, you can actually run indefinitely. So a nice option there. That gives people who aren't in a position to go with the bringing the grid out or paying the big dollars for a full off-grid system, but are a little reluctant to go the way of the gasoline option because of cost, because of pollution, because of noise. There's another option that's out there now. So with ours, the stack, clip, and go, super simple system. And one of the other things that we do is we actually have a system where basically everything is built into components. So I personally am very opposed to the planned obsolescence that a lot of companies have, so that every 2 years you're looking at replacing your cords because you have to have a new phone and this won't work and now you need all the new accessories. That really benefits nobody but the company's pocket. It's terrible for the environment and sucks for the consumers because we're stuck buying a whole lot of new equipment and accessories. So what we do by contrast is we make everything into components. And by the way, the actual Grengen, our prototype, is at our booth, so if anybody would like to see it, please do come over and check it out afterwards. But basically, the way we build our system is that we can also advance with technology. So does anybody here besides me, is anybody a big enough geek to know anything about battery technology, the advancement? No, okay. So this is me jumping into my geek mode a little bit further here, but one of the things that we know that's happening in battery technology is that there are a couple new technologies coming out, one being a solid-state lithium battery, another being graphene. If you haven't heard of graphene, Google it. The stuff is awesome. And one of the great things with it is it's actually produced here. We can produce it here in Alberta, and it's a derivative of carbon. So I think it's actually a wonderful potential for Alberta and Alberta's economy, because you're talking about something that is using the carbon that everybody complains that we create. So it's a nice balance in that regard. It is the most energy dense material that is currently available. So what we did with our system is we actually designed it so that you could, or we can, replace the existing battery packs with graphene or any other new technology that comes out. And that way, you don't have to replace the main unit. You only buy new battery when the existing battery comes to the end of its life cycle, which is actually probably 6 or 7 years if you're using it on a daily basis, over 10 if you're using it infrequently. So if you haven't read, though, about graphene, I really do encourage you to do so. It's a wonderful bit of technology that's being worked on. The U of A is actually leading a lot of the research there. It's wonderful stuff. Like I say, it's worth a read if you're interested. There are other interesting types of technology that you might also be interested in reading about. One is a gravity battery. So this is a system that's actually 100% clean. So batteries, of course, still have an environmental footprint. If you really want to take that next step, there's a lot of theory and discussion about something called a gravity battery that essentially uses a solar capture system to wind up weights that are underground, and then the weights release the energy as needed. So it's an interesting concept. I don't know if there's a lot of actual systems in use, but if you find that type of stuff interesting, by all means, take a look at it and read it, because it's very interesting stuff. And for Alberta in particular, I really do believe that we are the energy province, and that we are hopefully going to be the energy capital of the world with things like graphene. So for those who have that kind of interest, look it up. I do encourage it. I'm at the end of my presentation about portable power, but I do have time to stay and answer any questions that people have, because usually people do. Corey, do you want to bring the mic up? Here comes Vanna. Isn't he lovely?
Yes.
Is this useful for CPAP machines?
Yeah, our smallest unit is 600 watt peak, 300 continuous. So something like a CPAP machine on its full settings would run for 14 to 16 hours on a single charge.
So how much would that cost, a battery for that?
So that system is $850. We actually have our first set is half price for the show because we're relaunching it as a stackable unit. So it's $425 for anyone who is here at the show for this weekend. Our larger units would run it even longer. So our 1,000 watt unit with the bigger batteries, you'd be looking at about a week.
Sorry, I work for a retirement community. What about for people who are on oxygen?
It's about the same, actually. One of the things a lot of people don't realize is most medical equipment, electronics, things like that are actually very low draws on power. Things that are high draws on power are usually things with a heating coil. So toasters are terrible. They are my nemesis. I have to feed it with the 1,000 watt unit, but I hope someday we get better at heating coils as well. Electronics, though, like this TV probably runs at a little over 100 watts. My 55-inch at home is 125 watts. Your CPAP machine is probably even lower, probably about 60 watts, I would say, even with the humidifier on. So those types of things will run hours and hours and hours per battery pack. You're going to draw faster when you get into things like tools, but even the smallest ones, surprisingly, are not as high as you think. I can use a rotary tool, like a Dremel, on my smallest unit. I can get a couple hours, 3 hours of continuous Dremel, which nobody actually does.
You're even doing it at the show here. You're running all of your equipment at your booth off of one small unit, right?
Yeah, we actually.
It all day.
Yeah, we have a big digital display, and it just runs off our little unit. So the show tech people don't really like us that much because we come to shows and don't pay for power. We just bring it. But the reality is, whether you're doing trade shows or you're doing anything else, we tend to want to bring power with us. It might be, we've had discussions with, I don't believe the company's name out, but one of the larger construction companies in town was looking to put our smallest unit in their service trucks because simply the amount of billable time they lose on getting out to a site and finding that their tools or they've lost the truck battery goes dead or whatever, they lose so much billable time just going there and back that it simply pays for itself in usually one outing.
Any other questions, guys?
Aren't you desperate to know about graphene? Come on, it's so cool.
Tell us about graphene. There are the units there.
Yeah, so actually, this is our 1,000-watt unit here, and it actually, you can see, thanks, you just lift it off. And the batteries are actually reversible. So this is our prototype of the larger one. It's a 3D print, so if anybody thinks that's cool, like I do, you should check it out. This one's actually a finished unit, so it's an injection mold. It's a lot harder. This one is a little more fragile than the final unit.
This model you did as a 3D print?
Yeah, it's a 3D print. Isn't
That's
that cool?
so cool.
Yeah, the only thing was it's a tiny bit more fragile, so over the last few months it's kind of taken some bumps and bangs around a little bit. But it still works 100%. I know, isn't that cool with the 3D print? You can actually, with 3D prints, you can get them even more sophisticated, but it depends on how much you're willing to pay for the cost of the material.
Yeah.
So this was kind of mid-range for that.
That's awesome.
Not cheap, but very cool.
She's easy to nerd out with. It's fun. One day we're going to be building bridges with 3D prints.
I know, it is actually really crazy. One of the other things that, since I got my nerd hat on and shoes, one of the other things that's really interesting to look at is just the concept that we've got this idea that solar panels and wind turbines and things like that have to be aesthetically displeasing. So I think we're actually far past that. You can look, if you look right now, there are actually companies in the world that are producing solar panels that are perfectly clear glass, just like the glass on the side of a building, 100% clear. So can you imagine if we can get to a point where that's cost efficient enough that the entire side of a downtown building could be made with solar panels? It would charge the entire building. So we're actually past that point of solar panels and wind turbines being these big things and you're like, oh. Because the reality is when I go camping or, if I'm out with the kids and stuff, I don't really want to see that big ugly stuff necessarily. I want to be able to sit down and enjoy the lake and spend the time doing that stuff. And we can do it so much better. Just look at some of the technologies out there. I don't build solar panels, so I have no investment in that part. But have a look. There's been so much done in the last few years to change the appearance of them, to make them more discreet, whether it's solar roof tiles. And Tesla's not the only one who makes them. They are out there available for people to try. Check it out. There's so much neat technology there. The graphene, since you brought it up, is one of my favorites. One of the ways that they actually capture it is that they actually scrape the lining of eggshells. So this is one of the ways they actually get the material. So there's a company in Alberta right now, and I'm sorry I can't remember the name of them, but they're doing research, and what they're doing is they're actually cracking the eggs for, I think it's hospitals. So they're doing like a liquid egg thing, and then they keep the shells and scrape the shell lining to get this material to make graphene.
Just normal chicken eggs here. This is what we're talking about?
Chicken eggs. I know. Imagine if it was an ostrich. It's like 3 batteries in 1 egg. I actually don't know. The graphene, the way it works, so is what they do is they actually split it out, and they can pack so much energy into it that they can pack it down really tight. So the way energy density works, it's really kind of neat. The example I use is with food, because food, of course, has energy as well. So 500 grams of carrots versus 500 grams of carrot cake. One's a wee bit more energy dense than the other. I know which one I like. I may have given it away with my t-shirt, but some materials are able to contain more energy than others. So that's really what it's about. That's what a lot of the research around the world is happening right now, is how to capture energy and store it in an efficient way. So some of the most interesting things, universities in Sweden, China, all across Canada, US, Europe, you name it, they're looking at materials like graphene supercapacitors, graphene batteries, just a variety of different materials. And the reality is, because we're looking at being able to be off-grid, it's so funny, historically, so geeky now, you can cut me off if I get too geeky.
No, this is great.
Okay, so if we look back actually at the development of power and the power grid within North America, there was a lot of debate actually between Tesla and Edison about whether the system should be direct current or alternating current. So direct current was what Edison actually was promoting. And it is actually a superior technology. Problem was that you can't push direct current a very long distance. And because our power was generated in big coal plants, we needed to be able to push it miles and miles and miles. So alternating current won the day, and our system was built on alternating current. So we rev it up and we push it all over the place. But the reality is now we actually have no real need for a centralized power system. We can generate power anywhere. Anywhere with systems like solar panels and river turbines and wind turbines and things like that. So we're starting to see more and more direct current come back in. And the reason is that direct current is necessary for anything that is electronics usually. So you notice if you have your laptop, they always have that block on the bottom. That block is actually a converter. So it takes the AC power and converts it back to DC because your laptop will not run on AC. It has to have DC. Most power tools are the same. So we're actually, I have a theory that we're going to see more home builders and things like that putting direct current outlets into the wall alongside the AC so that you can plug those laptops and tablets and things like that directly into the wall, because it's a complete waste of energy to go AC back to DC, like DC, AC, DC, back and forth. So you lose a lot of efficiency there. So I think we're going to see some smart builders starting to do that kind of thing.
Talking about batteries, yesterday you brought up an interesting point that there's an ideal temperature environment for some of the batteries. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So obviously the most common battery in North America is unquestionably a lead acid. We use it extensively. It's been the number one technology because it's been ultra cheap. You can get a flooded lead acid battery for quite a low cost. The problem is that lead acid batteries don't do well in cold. In fact, they're very poor in cold. They also have a problem with what's called depth of discharge. So if anybody's ever drained their car battery twice, you know it pretty much is never going to hold a charge again. Good luck with that, you're going to have to replace it. It's because you go past the point of the acceptable depth of discharge. So with lead acid battery, they say don't drain it past 50%. Once you drain it past 50%, you're actually beginning to damage the battery. So when you're doing an off-grid system, for example, if you're getting a lead acid battery, they will tell you to plan for depth of discharge of 50%. That means you actually need twice as many batteries to have the same amount of energy. So if you wanted batteries to supply you 600 kilowatts of energy, you would need 1,200 kilowatts worth of battery. And that's because you can't drain them as far. Now, the super batteries, by contrast, are actually better that way. You can drain them to zero. There's no memory on them. And you don't damage the battery. But they're more expensive. Flooded lead acid, you're getting the cheapest, but then you have to do the maintenance on them. So it's a little bit of a trade-off either way. The bigger things are things like in the cold, you're looking at a lead acid will have 20% of its capacity at minus 20. A lithium ion will still maintain 80% of its capacity at minus 20. It also goes the other way with heat, but it's way less relevant for us.
Any other questions, guys? Yes.
Hang on, one second. Does snow hinder solar power?
You know what? It's less than you would think. One of the things that a lot of people don't know with solar is most of the time when they talk about the angles for solar panel is based on the equator. In Alberta, if you weren't sure, you'd be better to put it flat on the wall, which is kind of great in terms of snow because the snow won't stay; it'll just fall off. And that is, in fact, a reality. I think somebody told me Nate has a big display up about it. Am I right? Yeah, they have a big display about it, and it's almost vertical. So here, the nice thing with snow is if you're at the proper angle, realistically, the snow is not going to stay on it. But of course, if it is fully covered, you won't get the efficiency. The other thing, though, interesting with panels is there are companies. I think this one's out of Britain. But they're putting graphene on top of a solar panel, and it can actually capture energy in the rain. So it'll actually capture a raindrop. So, which, if you're in England, you might, that might be, if you've ever lived there, the weather might change rather quickly, and that might be appropriate. It might go from very sunny to very wet very quickly. So, another interesting thing that's being developed.
Amazing. Anyone else? Cool. Thanks so much for your time, guys. Really appreciate it. Connie, where's your booth at?
My booth is just over by the kitchen area, the cottage kitchen. great food and free samples, just saying. So if anybody has any individual questions, I'm hanging around for a while. My staff are over there as well. And come check it out.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Connie. Really appreciate it.